Am I there? I am there. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our evening service at Gateway Baptist Church. And as we have been doing, we are beginning with a short Bible study in the book of Genesis, finishing up chapter 2, looking at the biblical creation. And the reason we're doing this is because we need to be armed in the things of God. And we need to understand the things that God has done and that He deems to be of the greatest importance. And it was greatly important to God in order to reveal to us what He did, and in some extent how He did it, so that we understand that our God is supreme. He is the only self-existent person who ever existed, who exists now, or ever will exist. That is, there is no outside force, no outside declaration. There is no outside doctrine outside of Himself that is required in order for God to be. God is. And so therefore, since God is, all that has come to be is the result of His specific and wonderful creation. Now, the Bible tells us in the first 2 chapters of Genesis that God spoke each individual thing into existence. He spoke man into existence, and yet at the same time it says that He formed him from the dust of the ground, from the dirt of the earth. That reminds me of a story that I heard listening to one of the creation conferences. And if you think it's a silly joke, you can blame Dr. Henry Morris for it, because I stole it from him. And but anyway, he said that Satan observed God. Now, we don't know if he did or not, but he observed God when He created man in the first place. And he watched what He did when He created the animals and the fowls of the air and the fishes of the sea. And then He made man, and then He made woman, and supposedly Satan said to him, "Well, I can do that. Why don't you let me give it a try?" So God says, "All right, you give it a try." So the devil reaches down and grabs up a fistful of mud, and God says, use your own dirt. That's something that he can't do. Only God can create from the very beginning. God made the dirt and the water and the air. Someone once told me that I was older than dirt. And he changed it. He said, "No, you're older than water. That's older than dirt." But I'm not, by the way, in case you're inclined to agree with that. But we want to pick up here in verse 16 in chapter 2. Where God is introducing us to the idea that He planted a garden. And He put the man into the garden. Now, remember, this is in the very beginning. The whole earth is a lush, plant-covered, beautiful place. And I don't really know what the difference is between this garden that God planted for man and all the rest of the earth, except that it is a special, designated place that God especially fixed for man to dwell in. As J. Vernon McGee liked to say on occasion, the whole earth was a garden. And the whole earth was. They have dug in the ice in Siberia and Antarctica and the Arctic region, and they have determined, and by they I mean secular scientists, have determined that once upon a time, and this is mind-boggling to them, the whole earth was once tropical. That there are, and in fact there are still, I think it's near Kent in England, there is still a warm zone where there are palm trees growing. I didn't know that until just here recently. The equator, we look upon the equator as being the only temperate tropical zone that there is, on both sides of the equator, above and below and around the equator itself. But both caps at one time were covered with tropical plants. And all of that fits in perfectly with the idea that there was a canopy around the earth, preserving the temperature, preserving the conditions, keeping contaminants out, and providing then a perfect universal temperature and climate all around the earth. So God created heaven and earth. He created all the plants and animals, and he created a garden and he put man into it, verse 16, in order to keep and dress it. Now there are our orders from God to mankind to protect the earth. To keep means to guard it, to keep it flourishing, to protect the care of it. And so we are to keep and to dress it. Dressing the garden has to do with agriculture. It has to do with cultivation in order to produce the food and the desirable plants that would bring comfort and sustenance to mankind in the first place. And then God set, in verse 17, he set some parameters. He told Adam to look around at not only the garden, but all of the vegetation and the conditions of the world, the plants, the animals, and everything that is. And he says, of all of the trees and plants and herbs of the earth, you may eat for your food, you and the animals. The animals at that time were also, we learned that in chapter 1, vegetarian. And they were vegetarian until, at the very least, until man sinned. It is possible that some animals became aggressive and territorial and even to the point of fighting and destroying other flesh after the fall of man, because the fall of man ruined the creation of God and brought in other conditions other than what God created and desired for it. So he set some parameters. He says, every tree and every herb you may eat except for one tree. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, was that a special tree? I doubt it. Was it a specific kind of tree? I don't think so. I think it was one tree, just like the other trees, because when Eve looked at it later on after she was created, she looked upon it and saw that it was fair and good for food and just like all the rest of them. But it was because God designated this one specific tree as off limits that made it off limits. And reaching up and taking the fruit from that tree for your food then became the contrary to what God had said, the contrary to the will of God, and that became evil. Okay? Anything that we do in the will of God, God blesses. Anything that we do contrary to the will of God, God curses. And that was the entry of evil into the world. That was the beginning of sin in mankind. That was the point of change in all of creation. Now, he introduces in verse 17 the idea of sin and judgment. That if they would eat of the tree that he told them to leave alone and not eat of it, that they would be cursed and the ground would be cursed for thy sake. In sorrow thou shalt eat of it all the days of thy life. Now, sorrow there doesn't mean that every time they pull an apple off of a tree or an ear of corn off of the stalk, that they were extremely saddened about it. It just simply means that there would be suffering involved. That there would be something involved that wasn't involved in the first place. There are no guarantees that our crops will flourish. There are no guarantees that all of the nutrients may be there. Now, those are suppositions on my part, but I think it fits well with this word sorrow because it just simply means that there will be difficulty associated with gathering our food and toiling in the soil and tilling the soil. And then in verse 18, for the first time, thorns and thistles shall it bring forth to thee. Thou shalt eat the herb of the field. Now, for the first time, they have to fight with briars and thorns and thistles and weeds of all kinds that would compete with them for their use of the soil in order to produce food and the things that would bring them pleasure. And then it reveals in verse 18 that man is alone. Now, man probably never gave that thought, man, up to this point, because remember, he just arrived on the scene. God had just made him out of the dust of the ground and had just given him the parameters and the rules by which he should live for the rest of the days of his life. And then he says, thorns and thistles shall bring forth. Thou shalt eat of the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground. For out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto the dust thou shalt return. Or shalt thou return? Right? Not in the right chapter, but it fits so well. And God said, it is not good for the man that he should be alone. I will make him and help meet for him. There you go. By the way, it was never Adam's idea to go look for a wife. It was God's idea. That was the completion of his purpose. Adam didn't object, believe me. But it was God's purpose and not Adam's. He He didn't go looking for a wife. He didn't examine the creatures of earth to see if there was some creature there that would be a suitable partner for him. That was God's idea. And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field, every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever Adam called them, called every living creature, that was the name thereof. I don't think he gave them specific names. Junior and I were talking about this quite some time ago, and I think you raised that idea that he didn't give them specific names like Chihuahua and Holstein and Hereford and all of those that we would see as breed names or as species names. But I think because of what we see down here in verse 20, he gave general names like cattle and elephants and horses, because those are all kinds. And within those kinds, then we have different species, and within the species we have breeds, and within the breeds we have confusion. But I think that is what we can determine from that, is that he didn't give them specific names, but he named them in general. And Adam gave names to all the cattle and the fowl of the air and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found an help meet for him. And again, God was the only one making notice of that. Until we get down here, it hadn't even crossed Adam's mind, and the Lord God caused deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead, and the rib which the Lord had taken from man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. It was his idea. He put Adam to sleep, took a piece of the flesh from his side, made the woman, woke up Adam, and then brought the woman to Adam for the very first time. And Adam then made a statement. Now, according to Billy Graham, the statement was, "Wow!" And the Hebrew allows for that, by the way. It does. And where it says, "She is now bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh." That is a true statement. But that isn't how people respond. We respond with excitement. And we respond with enthusiasm and anticipation and gratitude. And Adam was grateful for this latest of God's creation, the woman that he made and brought to Adam in order to complete his life. We'll pick up there another time. And we'll try to stay in the right chapter.